Chapter 14 of Northanger Abbey. The scene is set at a hill that is located on the south side of Bath, UK. The hill is called Beechen Cliff. And what's happening here is that Catherine and Tilney and his sister, who we find out her name is Eleanor, are having a walk. First thing that comes up is they discuss novels, and they discuss the topic of history. Catherine doesn't really like history, and Eleanor does. And so we have our famous allusions, again, as Austen likes to do, which I totally dig it every time she does that, to Johnson, Blair, David Hume, William Robertson, Caractacus, Agricola, and Alfred the Great. And there comes a moment where they start talking in terms of ways that kind of expose kind of who's more educated than the others. Eleanor's on the outside of this part, whereas it's kind of between Catherine and Tilney, to where Catherine feels a natural sense of self-awareness and insecurity because she isn't able to really comment on how Tilney is talking and discussing on very fine points of detail on how to describe nature. What Austen does in this moment is that she makes it a point that Catherine's inability to discuss the topic on an intellectual level actually works to her advantage, because in that day it would have been inappropriate to make it seem like you're smarter than the person that you're talking to, especially if it's in the case of it being a woman talking with a man. So even if she does know the topic and she can really nail the points of the intellect, it would work to her advantage if she didn't make it known. Another thing that occurs in chapter 14, and I wish I would have known this when I did my video on the letters of Jane Austen, and that's where I go through, and what I did was I speculated kind of playfully. The second half of that video is really devoted to being as serious as I possibly can towards the life of Jane Austen. But what I wanted to do, and I think Jane Austen might have appreciated it, to be honest, was that I was having a little fun with the notion that her sister burnt all the letters, and I was like, those letters, who knows what was in them, probably all kinds of gossip, but for all we know, she could have been, transmitting information through a spy network, because basically where she lived and where Bath is, and that lower end of England is along the route that would have extended between London and Ireland, and that there was all kinds of worry at that time about revolution because of the French Revolution, and so England was like, no, we don't want any of that. There was a spy network in place to help get information on the jump on any types of insurgencies or any kind of people planning to cause upheaval, and lo and behold, it comes up in her novel. So I wish I would have seen this before I made that video, because then I would have had proof. Of course, this is written in the sense of it being fictional, and what Catherine admits to is that she's heard something through a letter of something shocking to be happening and occurring in London that's going to involve murder and who knows what. The passage that Henry Tilney gives us is recited here.
She immediately pictured to herself a mob of 3,000 men assembling in St. George's Fields, the Bank attacked, the Tower threatened, the streets of London flowing with blood, a detachment of the 12th Light Dragoons, the hopes of the nation, called up from Northampton to quell the insurgents, and the gallant Captain Frederick Tilney, in the moment of charging at the head of his troop, knocked off his horse by a brickbat from an upper window.
So if you can guess what that whole situation is really about, feel free to let us know in the comments. In chapter 15, we are referenced to a place called Edgar's Buildings, and that's always interesting to see these names come up in Bath because it really gives it an authentic touch. So we have Pulteney Street, and we have the Crescent, and we have the upper and lower rooms, and so it just really feels like this is a real event that has occurred. The authenticity here is incredible. Chapter 15 is important because this is where we learn that James, the brother of Catherine, has proposed to Isabella, and she has accepted. Chapter 16 comes around, and we are introduced to the rooms again, only now it's not being referenced to whether or not we know it's the lower rooms, which is the south side, or the upper rooms, which is the north side. It's just being referred to now as the rooms. Very curiously, we learn that the siblings, Henry Tilney and Eleanor, they have a brother who's in the military, and his name is Captain Tilney. Later we learn his name is Frederick. This is an interesting person to be introduced into the mix, because all of a sudden and for some reason he puts the moves on Isabella, and it's, you know, kind of odd seeing as how she had just gotten engaged. And Catherine makes note of it. She reacts to it in a curious way because she's wondering about the feelings of her brother, who isn't there, by the way, because he's gone back home from Bath to get consent on from his parents to do the marriage. So Isabella is alone. Captain Tilney is hitting on her. In chapter 17, we learned that 5 weeks have now passed at Bath. There's 1 week left. Catherine starts getting a little antsy about it because she's just starting to get to know the Tilneys, and so the Allens, who she had gone there with, decide, well, we'll go ahead and stay for an extra 2 weeks. And so everything is all nice and fixed now, and she has more time to get to know them and just, you know, enjoy time in Bath for a total of 2 months. Only problem is the Tilneys are now getting ready to leave. Miss Tilney is about to invite Catherine to the Abbey. Right as she's about to do it, her father, the general, interrupts her and personally invites Catherine to stay at the Abbey. And Catherine's like, stay at an Abbey after I've been reading the mysteries of Udolpho? You've got to be kidding me. Of course I'm gonna go. This is like rock and roll. I mean, the answer will be yes, provided I can get permission from the Allens. And of course all the permission goes through, and so it's set. Catherine is on her way to an actual castle in England. Chapter 18 brings us to the pump room. This is before Catherine is about ready to go to the Abbey. Isabella tells her via a letter that John Thorpe, her brother, has written that he's madly in love with Catherine, and it's like it's been kind of obvious, and I guess Catherine's making it seem like she's never really noticed. And but the thing about it, though, is that the letter that Isabella is reading to her, or that she's referencing, also contains a passage in which John Thorpe makes the claim that Catherine is returning the feelings of, you know, affection, and she adamantly tells her that no, she is not returning the affection. And Isabella, she's just like, oh, that they're kind of in denial about certain things, or it's almost manipulative the way they that her and her brother do this, because they're creating things and trying to make things that aren't kind of like stop trying to make something happen that isn't. It's kind of a meme almost. Isabella is kind of like, okay, all right, I get it. You're not going to marry my brother, whatever, let's move on with the conversation. But then what occurs is that Catherine also notices that Isabella continues her flirtations with Captain Tilney, Henry Tilney's brother. And so they had danced at the ball in the previous chapter, and now Isabella is continuing this flirtation, and Catherine's like, you're engaged to my brother, and you're behaving in this way, and it's making me feel uncomfortable for my brother and for myself, because it just looks inappropriate. And she talks to Henry about it, and Henry's like, well, what do you want me to do about it? And Catherine, she wants Henry to tell her brother to get out of town. And he's like, I'm not going to do that. The man can make his own decisions. And Catherine is becoming frustrated, and she thinks that this problem is centered in and around the captain, who knows that she's engaged. And it's for Henry Tilney to explain to Catherine that it's really more about Isabella being receptive to his advances. And Catherine has kind of some trouble accepting that. And basically the way Henry Tilney breaks it down to her is that ultimately you can't control others and you can't control outcomes. So no matter how much you must love your brother, or that you obviously love your brother and that you don't want to see him get hurt, there's not much you're going to be able to control unless you want to inject yourself in the business. So this turns into a kind of like A, mind your own business. B, you can't control how Isabella's behaving. He's allowed to make all the advances that he wants, Captain Tilney, but if she wasn't accepting of it, then the captain would just leave of his own accord. But she's being a flirt about it, so you can't control that. And what that leads to is ultimately the maxim that you can't control an outcome. In chapter 20 of Northanger Abbey, this is where we get the trip to the Abbey itself, and Catherine is traveling with a couple other girls, Henry's sister and the maid, and Henry is talking while they're traveling, and they have a layover because it's a 30-mile trip or something. And so this chapter is actually, it's interesting on a linguistic level, because if you've been reading Emma, we here on Book Time Learning, we've been doing Pride and Prejudice, and we've done Emma, and so we know her language, Jane Austen's language, to be very oriented around the relationships that are occurring between men and women and the environment in England. And so it's interesting to get to Northanger Abbey, because in this particular chapter, all of a sudden we've got Jane Austen going off the rails on some really gothic writing. I mean, she's having Henry talk to Catherine in a way like he's preparing her to be really sort of terrified of this gigantic Gothic castle, and he is laying into some serious descriptions about, creepy corners and tapestries and potential things that are going to be found that aren't pleasant, and long hallways where people have been abducted, and all different kinds of Gothic tropes are being conveyed in these passages, and the writing, it just really stands out if you're used to analyzing writing, and you get used to the writing of one particular author, and you see this kind of sudden shift. It's really pretty impressive, and it lays it lays down quite the imagery for the mind to really go off the rails with the imagination. But here Catherine does she doesn't really fall for it so much. And of course, when they arrive at the Abbey, it turns out he was toying with her because she's not really that impressed with it. It's kind of the Abbey's been totally remodeled, so it looks more like a small chateau or something. Parts of it are still in ruins, and then parts of it are remodeled or something like that. In chapter 21, we're in Catherine's room. She's been shown to her room, and so the imagination returns when she notices a mysterious chest in the corner, and it's explained by Eleanor that the chest is too heavy to move. So but it's been there for a long time, and becomes a moment of conversation for a couple seconds, and they're just like, yeah, it's a big chest, but it's mysterious. Later, it becomes Snoopy, and it's like it's a dark and stormy night. She's in her room alone, poking around, and she finds an infamous black cabinet, and she can't resist poking through the thing, and there's nothing to be found, and there's peals of thunder, and it's raining, it's hitting the windows, and it's really it's kind of a menacing tone, and she eventually finds a roll of paper, and the candle is almost out, and she decides she really wants to inspect it closely, so she's just going to read it in the morning. She doesn't want to learn any gruesome details about what's going on this roll of paper that she's discovered in the infamous black cabinet. So she sets it aside and rolls around in bed all night trying to get to sleep, wondering what's on that roll of paper. Chapter 22, she finds out what's on the paper. She's really sort of disappointed to learn that it's just a laundry list, or it's like a bill for washing, and it's just got some other mundane list that pertains to the household. I think we're all feeling it with her, that it's kind of a little embarrassing that she was expecting to learn all these gruesome details about the house. However, things take a different turn when the general goes to take her for a tour of the house, and Eleanor goes with him. And so they go for a walk on the grounds around the Abbey. And here, for some reason, Catherine just starts developing strange feelings about the general that are kind of inexplicable, in my opinion. And I'm not really certain why she's doing it, because he's been polite to her up to this moment. If you've been reading the novel, you'll find that every time the general and Catherine interact, the general is like super polite to her. So they're walking the grounds, and they encounter the spot that I guess affects the general personally on an inner emotional level, because it's something to do with his wife who has passed away sometime like a decade previous, somewhere in and around there. And so he ventures off, and Catherine starts wondering, why doesn't he want to walk through the area that would bring back, potentially good memories of his wife. Why would he want to, want to avoid that? This, for some reason, sends her on a kind of a personal inner mental tirade against him as he's continuing to be nice to her, and she's developing this image that he's, for some reason, doesn't, want to remember his wife. She develops what's termed as virtuous indignation. So she's being kind about the fact that she's not feeling too well about the general. All of a sudden, she's just feeling, kind of like he's a menacing person all of a sudden, like he's got something to hide. That feeling that she develops continues into chapter 23, where they go on a house tour, and so it's like any doorway could have been where his wife could have died, and she's thinking, she mentions the word or the name of Montani, who is the evil person from the Mysteries of Udolpho. She knows that Mrs. Tilney had died in one of these rooms, and so her imagination just goes crazy with the idea that the general now is some kind of a culprit, and that he has, he had kept his wife hidden away for some reason. The kids at that time wouldn't have been adults, obviously. This is 10 years previous. So Eleanor would have been 10 or something. She wouldn't have been able to understand, and maybe the boys wouldn't have noticed that the general was somehow keeping his wife, secretly away, and that he was causing her death somehow. It just seems strange that after we've been getting to know Catherine up to this point, she does seem to have some measure of sensibility, but then all of a sudden now she seems to be going off the deep end with this imagination of creating the general now as this menacing, intimidating, evil person who has killed his wife. So that's where we're going to leave it for now. Remember that Book Time Learning is dedicated to the study of writing and literature. I want to thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.